But I find it amazing that we have this new finding of the 46 stars representing the 46 popes, which then again complements this discussion that we've been having on this channel about Pope Benedict XVI being the last pope of these times. Welcome to this video. We'll discuss the astounding finding regarding Our Lady of Guadalupe. And it's very interesting about Our Lady of Guadalupe is that there seems to be much revealed about the Tilma and also the apparition itself after so many years. It's almost been 500 years since the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And it's very reminiscent of the other apparition in Quito, Ecuador of the same century, Our Lady of Good Success, otherwise known as Our Lady of the Good Event of the Purification. And the reason why I see similarities, it's not just because of the same century, but also because it was a similar situation where you have some findings regarding the apparition that are not readily known until much later. They seem to be relevant and almost meant to be for a later time. And in the case of Our Lady of Good Success, much remained hidden. For about 400 years, much remained hidden. And it was only very recently that the messages from Our Lady of Good Success have become known. And coincidentally, it's very similar to Our Lady of Guadalupe. Much regarding the Tilma and the apparition itself has not become known until recent times. So let's look at some of the findings that I'm referring to that are seen to be met for today and have only become found because of scientific advancement, which enable us, one, to authenticate the fact that this is a true permanent sign of our Blessed Mother left almost 500 years ago, 1531, in what is today Mexico. So one of the findings is that, and this was known perhaps a little longer than the others that I'll discuss, but that the Tilma itself, the material that it's made of, it should have deteriorated over 400 years ago. That kind of fabric does not last beyond 30 years, but yet it is still there for all to see after almost 500 years. And just recently, because of scientific advancements, we're able to see that there's no coloring or no paint that's been applied to the Tilma itself to provide the image. And also we're able to see 13 people that are reflected in the iris of the image itself of our Blessed Mother, one being St. Juan Diego. Now, one of the other findings we've had recently that is very interesting is the legend of the Flower Kingdom. It's a legend of the indigenous people regarding this kingdom that is replete with flowers, and the flowers have certain meanings. And Our Lady of Guadalupe, one of the great signs that was provided after the bishop asked for a sign to Juan Diego, was the roses. Roses that just happened to not be able to grow at that time, which was in December, to be exact, December 12th, 1531. And the other sign was that these were Castilian roses, roses that were easily identifiable by the bishop, who knew also that they should not be there in Mexico at that time. The other finding is there some that say there's musical notes on the tilma, which is very interesting. And also that the image itself is of a pregnant woman. And not just a pregnant woman, but a woman who's about to give birth any day. And again, I mentioned that this occurred on December 12th, 1531. So if you look at December 12th, any day would be the birth of Jesus. And it corresponds to that time, which is just amazing. So the recent discovery is that astronomers have determined that the 46 stars that appear on the tilma correspond to the sky as it was on December 12th, 1531, which is another amazing fact. Someone recently, and I want to give him credit, he's an amateur astronomer. His name is Alessandro Massano. And he discovered that these 46 stars, after determining how many popes existed from the time of this apparition until now, corresponds to Pope Benedict XVI being the 46th pope. After the pope, who was the pope at that time, Pope Clement VII. And this corresponds rather nicely to some of the other prophecies. And I've discussed these prophecies on my channel, which are the prophecies of the popes from Garabandal, the vision of 1884 by Pope Leo XIII, and also the prophecies of the popes by St. Malachi. So I'd like to show you the picture of the 46 stars. And these 46 stars are represented in this picture within their constellations. So some may say, well, that is just coincidental that there's 46 popes after the Marian apparition of Guadalupe. That ends with Pope Benedict XVI. And if that were the only sign regarding these popes, I would say you're perhaps correct. But the other sign is that these constellations happen to be 14 constellations, and there have only been 14 names of popes since that apparition. And I'm going to show you those in a minute. Within the 14 constellations, there's a number of stars within the constellations as appearing on the tilma. They correspond to the same number of the names of the popes that correspond to that constellation. So let me bring that up to be clear. So you see on the left-hand side, and it's in Italian, so apologize for that, but the source is from an Italian gentleman. And on the left, you'll see the names of the popes. There's 14 different names of the popes. And right next to the name is the number of the occurrences of those names, such as Pius. Pope Pius was used 9 times between Our Lady of Guadalupe and Pope Benedict XVI. St. Pope John Paul II. There was a 1 and there was a 2. That name appears twice. And within the constellation, there's only 2 of them. So the number of the constellations matches the number of the different names of the popes. Not only that, but the number of the stars within each constellation corresponds to the number of times that the name was used by each pope for that name. So it's an amazing coincidence that if I calculated the probability of this occurring, it would be astronomical. What does that say? Well, I like to look at it in context of other Marian apparitions that I mentioned, like Garabandal. So at Garabandal, we had the prophecy of the four popes. Remember, Garabandal started in 1961 when Pope John the 23rd was reigning. And at his death, Conchita said that there would be only four popes remaining until the end of times. And of course, those four popes were Pope Paul VI, Pope John Paul I, Pope John Paul II, and Pope Benedict. So it's pointing to the exact same time. The end times referred to in Garabandal is very important, just as this is very important, because it points to the exact same time, and it's pointing to an end of an era. So people often misunderstand this reference to end times, the end of times, and think that it means one of a few things that are incorrect. One, that is the end of time, which everyone will tell you that knows anything about Garabandal will tell you that that's not the case. It does not mean the end of time. It means the end of these times, which means the end of this era, and that we're going into a new era. And the era, of course, is going to be demarcated by the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Some people believe that this idea of these end of times means that it corresponds to the very end as depicted in the book of Revelation. And that's not the case either. This is not the second coming of Jesus. And it's not the end of the world. It's not also the last judgment. So don't worry. Don't worry about that. But what I do want to say is that if you don't understand the end times as described by this prophecy of Garabandal, it's also pointed to by what appears to be a prophecy embedded in the Tilma of the stars of 46 popes. If you don't understand what these end times mean, then you're not going to understand Garabandal. You're not going to understand Medjugorje. You're not going to understand Fatima. And you're not going to understand the book of Revelation. These end times, and I mentioned the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, they correspond also to the event known as the warning from Garabandal, and also mentioned by other saints. This warning is the intermediate coming of Jesus, spiritually, not in the flesh. And it's going to be a reawakening of our souls, and hopefully a reawakening of the whole culture, the whole world, and the church as well. So let's go back to the idea of the 46 popes. I mentioned Pope Leo the 13th. And the interesting aspect of that is that there was a promise of God to the devil. When the devil was arguing with God, the devil asked for 100 years of more power. Well, there's a question regarding when that 100 years started. Now, I'll give you the three possibilities. So one possibility is it started in 1884, and the 100 years would be over in 1984. The big event then was Pope John Paul II. He attempted the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart. And I know he didn't mention Russia, so you don't need to leave comments regarding that. But that was a big event then. The other one is not too well upheld. I may be one of the few who believe this may be the case, but 1914 is another possibility. And that corresponds, 1914, to the apparition of Rushev in Ukraine by our Blessed Mother. Also corresponds to the beginning of World War I, which is no coincidence. Rushev is another apparition that is closely tied to Fatima. Fatima occurred 3 years later, of course, in 1917. And also during 1917, you had a very diabolical revolution of the Bolsheviks. So 1917 is also a possibility when this 100 years started. And of course, when we're talking about heaven, it may not be 100 years exactly. It could be less or a little more, but it's meant to provide a period to us where the devil would have additional power. So why do I bring this up when talking about Garabandal and the 46 popes? Well, when you think about 1914 and 1917, it is around the time of the end of the pontificate of Pope Benedict XVI. So you add 100 years to 1914 or 1917, and you're close. With Rushev, you're almost exact on 100 years. So the other prophecy that is very relevant to what we're discussing is the prophecies of Saint Malachi. And it's a book that I've had for some time now. He was a 13th century Archbishop of Ireland, and he was said to have written down these small descriptions, very short descriptions, only a few words, for each pope that would come after him. And the last popes on his prophecies, but again, this is from the 13th century, so there's many popes. The last popes were the ones that we have just seen, Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict. And the descriptions are uncanny. Now, there's been some controversy about the fact that these prophecies were found in the Vatican archive after hundreds of years. Well, very much like we just discussed Our Lady of Good Success and her messages, they seem like they disappeared and were not even considered for hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden, they reappear in prominence. And believe it or not, that was one of the prophecies of Our Lady of Good Success, that they would not be relevant until the time when they were meant to be relevant, which were these times. The prophecy of St. Malachi, the conclusions that are come to by Alessandro Bassano, that Pope Benedict is the last legitimate pope, I can't dispute that enough. And that is just incorrect. And actually, the prophecy of St. Malachi saying that the last pope will be Peter the Roman means that there will be additional popes. It's not going to be the last pope, Pope Benedict XVI. So that's not what this prophecy is about. This prophecy is pointing to Pope Benedict XVI because Pope Benedict XVI marks the end of an era, the end of times, as our Blessed Mother told Conchita Gonzalez. And what that means, it doesn't mean he's the last pope, that there won't be other popes. It means that we're going into a new era. And this era is the era of the reign of the Immaculate Heart, the triumph of her Immaculate Heart, the reign of the divine will. Let's not misunderstand what these prophecies represent. But I find it amazing that we have this new finding of the 46 stars representing the 46 popes, which then, again, complements this discussion that we've been having on this channel about Pope Benedict XVI being the last pope of these times. Now, I don't want people to misunderstand me and say that because I'm not agreeing that he's the last legitimate pope, I'm not saying that everything is hunky-dory in the world of the Roman Catholic Church. We live in a time of apostasy, and the apostasy has affected everyone, even those who believe that they are living good Catholic lives. We are all affected in some way or another, directly or indirectly. And you can think of it as someone who is trying to be as clean as possible but lives in a sewer. And someone who lives in a sewer is going to get dirty. And that sewer, of course, is the godless pagan culture that we live in today. And we cannot help but be affected by it. People who are in the church, whether they're just Catholic laymen or they're religious or they're part of the hierarchy, they're human also, and they're affected as well. And this new era is meant to be a turnaround. It's meant to be a renewal, a type of resurrection. And I want to thank the Italian channels for presenting Alessandro Massano and his finding. It's very exciting, and I'm not surprised if we see more from the Tilma of Guadalupe. I also want to thank Robert Nugent and his excellent channel for providing this to the English-speaking world and making it available to us. I want to thank everyone for joining, and God bless.